Well, thanks, Sophie, for the nice introduction, and welcome again, everyone. So what I'll be doing, I'm going to talk about two very different approaches to assessing climate risk. So we have the definition, which Sophie just clearly explained. The definition is still a theoretical concept, but what if you want to do a climate risk assessment for a country as a whole or for a specific city? Then you need to make some choices, what methods to use and what fits for that specific context. So I took two very diverse or very different approaches. One is a comprehensive climate risk assessment for a country as a whole. And the other one is a very easy to implement rapid climate risk assessment that you can use for cities, for example. So they are very different examples. And I will not dive into the theory all that much. It is really two examples from our work. So I'll be sharing some hands-on experiences. So the first example I want to share with you is about Bangladesh, one of the most vulnerable countries on Earth. And a few years ago, we were asked to help with the national level climate risk assessment of Bangladesh. And this is an example of a comprehensive, in-depth climate risk assessment. You can find the report here. The URL is there at the bottom of your screen. And I'll just share some of the experiences we had in this project. So what we did, we followed a stepwise procedure to compute climate risk. And this procedure is described in a very nice publication by GIZ, the Climate Risk Sourcebook. And I also posted the URL here in the slide. So if you are interested to follow this approach, this is really a very useful piece of work. And again, I'm not going to go through every step. I would have to cut some corners and give you a very rough sort of overview. Okay, so we have the definition of climate risk, and we are focusing on the country of Bangladesh. So the first step in the assessment is to ask ourselves what hazards are relevant for the country. So if I ask you, how many different hazards can you identify, can you think of? Between 1 and 4, between 5 and 10, maybe some of you can think of more than 10. I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about this. Okay, so most of you indicated between 1 and 5. Some between 5 and 10, and there's even one person that can think of more than 25. Well, that is really exciting. And actually that one person is right, because if we look at the overview of hazards that was published, yes, we can. I think all the slides will be shared, right, on the SAFE4ALL website. Yeah. So what we see here is an overview of all hazards that have been identified, and this is done under the EU taxonomy, so you can also find that online. There are actually 28 different hazards that were identified here. Temperature-related, so heat stress, heat waves, for instance, wind-related, like cyclones and storms, water-related, droughts, but also salinity, different flood types, and solid mass-related, so erosion, coastal erosion, river erosion, things like that. So there's a huge variety of different hazards. And in a comprehensive risk assessment for the country, you ideally want to capture all relevant hazards for that particular country. So a comprehensive assessment is quite a challenge. And the first step for us in the example of Bangladesh was to identify the relevant hazards. Now, the next step is to think of, okay, what elements are then exposed to these hazards? So how to go about that. And what we did here was we started from a very simple concept. You probably heard this before: people, planet, profit. So people can be exposed to hazards, so human capital can be affected, but also natural capital can be affected. Water resources can become depleted, biodiversity and environment can be harmed by climatic hazards. And then, of course, production capital like agriculture, livestock, fisheries, so navigation, transport, and infrastructure. So all these systems are affected potentially by climate change. Now, in a comprehensive climate risk assessment, you want to capture all relevant hazards, all relevant sectors or aspects of society that are at risk. So in the example of Bangladesh, we identified in what we call impact chains. So we try to capture the relationship between hazard, exposure, and vulnerability for all these elements. And I'm going to show you one example, the one on the top here. So human risk, and this is about people being directly affected by disasters, climate-induced disasters. Now, the impact chain, it's a bit of a dazzling picture, but what we try to do here is to build the relationship between the hazard factors, which are in blue. So you see on the top of the screen cyclones, storm surges, sea level rise, and then changing rainfall patterns leading to different types of floods, so riverine flooding, flash flooding. So these are the hazard factors. Now, on the green, we have the exposure factors. So this is people exposed to these hazards. And if we have embankments to protect people, the exposure is less. If people have the opportunity to go to flood and cyclone shelters, this is also a way to reduce the exposure to that hazard. So we have exposure factors, and then we have vulnerability factors on the left of the screen. So here we have things like access to health facilities, poverty, levels of education, well, the interplay between those factors determine the risk that we are trying to capture, that we are trying to assess. Now, to be able to do that, for each of these indicators in the boxes, we have to find data sets. And if we have the data sets, we need to find ways to aggregate them, to combine them. So what you do there is you use normalization and weighting of each of the individual factors. And once you've done that, you can aggregate the components and compute human risk, an indicator for human risk. Now you can understand the complexity of all this, and many of the decisions that we had to make are subjective, because how do you exactly determine the relationship between vulnerability components, for instance, poverty, exposure, and hazard? So it took us almost 3 years to get through this whole process, involving all ministries, having many sessions in the country to jointly determine weight factors and ways to combine this. And this is only for one impact chain in the comprehensive risk assessment. So this is really a very elaborate and difficult process to get through. But once we did all this, we managed to compute climate risk. So to come up with an aggregated score for, in this case, people affected to climate-induced disasters. Now, what you see here on the map is that particularly the coastal belt of Bangladesh is more at risk, and this is due to a combination of things. So there are multiple hazards occurring at the same time. So you have coastal floods, cyclones, salinity, etc. But also the vulnerability of the people is higher. And for instance, in the capital, Dhaka, the vulnerability of people is considered to be less. There's less poverty, there's better access to health facilities, electricity, and so on. So in this way, we managed to capture climate risk for the whole of the country. Now you can imagine if you have to do this for all impact chains, it's a very daunting task, and it also requires a lot of data sets. So for each of the components, you need to have data, and in many countries, data availability is an issue. But in the end, we managed to generate a complete picture of all risks, covering all aspects of society. So, but to get there, we needed 84 input data sets, so different data sets on hazards, population census, topographical data sets. And yeah, data is not always available, and sometimes it's outdated. So that was quite a difficult task. So we computed 15 different risk indicators for the current reference period, but also we tried to come up with climate projections for future climate change. Now, this all was described in a 300-page report. Over 200 GIS maps were produced, and it took us 2.5 years to complete the assessment. So a comprehensive risk assessment is really a daunting task, and I don't know if you can see that in the screen, but I have a lot more gray hairs after the completion of this project. So this is the first example I wanted to share with you. Maybe there are already some questions. I put the report and the URL here on the slide again for you to have a look at if you're interested. Okay, so I think for the sake of time, we should move on to the next example. And this is a totally different approach. We call this a rapid climate risk assessment, which is less data intensive. It relies on expert judgment and expert knowledge primarily. It can only be done in co-production with stakeholders from the city you're working with. So it is really a collective effort, and therefore also more engaging. And also here we have a link to the online module. So there is a rapid climate risk assessment module available on the C40 Knowledge Hub. So the URL is here in the slides. So this was an approach that we developed for the C40 network. The C40 network is a cities network, like a resilient cities network. So yeah, and there are the link is now in the chat. So here we wanted to prevent the complexity of a full comprehensive risk assessment, and we wanted to develop something quick and easy. Now, it's really simple. It takes you through 3 steps in the procedure. So first of all, a hazard assessment, then diving into the impacts and eventually the risks. So I'll go through this following a few examples. Now, to determine climate hazards in a city in data sparse regions, what we do is we do a desktop study. We use search engines just to find out what are the hazards that have been occurring in the past few years. And the stakeholders in the city can probably tell you what kind of hazards are relevant for that particular city. Now, what we do, we look for news items from the local newspapers. We search Google, whatever, and we just produce an overview of past climatic hazards that have occurred in the city. Really simple. Then the next step is to look for evidence on changes in the future projections and the future scenarios. And for this, we use free and open climate data. One of the sources that is really useful is the interactive atlas, the IPCC atlas. Another very user-friendly source of information is climateinformation.org, where you can click on a location and it produces projections for different climate indicators. And then what we do is for each of the identified hazards, we try to find evidence for future changes. And we use that to develop very simple infographics. So for instance, if you have heat waves, you want to know what is the current yearly maximum temperature perhaps, and then you can look at the future projections and how that yearly maximum temperature may evolve. So this we do for all hazards that we have identified. Now, once we have mapped out the different hazards and the probable changes towards the future, we move to an impact assessment. And here we organize workshops with the people from the city. We take the hazard, and for each of these hazards, we try to identify again the impacts it will have on people, planet, and profit. So here in the colored bubbles, you see green natural impacts, or impacts that heat will have on nature and biodiversity. In the purple, we have the social impact. So heat may cause increase in water temperatures, which may lead to an increase in water and vector-borne diseases, for instance. So, and then we have the economic impacts as well. So this is a qualitative way to collectively, with the stakeholders in the city, determine the relevant impacts of the hazards which we have identified. So it's a qualitative method. Now that then leads to posters where we add new impacts, we review the impact diagrams, and then in the last step we ask the people in the meeting to prioritize the most relevant impacts and the most impactful events for the particular city. And that then leads to a top 5 or a top 10 prioritized impacts for that particular city. Now, once we've done that, we move to the final step, which is the risk assessment. And here we use what we call the risk matrix, which has severity of the impact and probability mapped out. So what we do is we ask, okay, from the impacts that we have identified, which of those are really disruptive for the city. Some impacts may cause damage, but will not completely disrupt the city. So it's a qualitative assessment, but usually it is quite easy to distinguish between disruptive events, damaging events, or maybe events that only cause nuisance. So that is the severity axis. Then we have probability, where we ask, okay, is this likely to happen within this century, likely to happen within decades, or likely to happen within years? So then on the top right, we have the high probability, high impact events. So the most hazardous, the most impactful events. So we take the prioritized impacts and we plot them onto this risk matrix, and we do that collectively with the participants in the assessment, and it may look something like this. So it's all qualitative. It's very easy to implement and to reproduce. Now, in the end, it may look like something like this, where we have all the identified impacts plotted onto the risk matrix, and a figure like this may feed into a climate action plan or a policy document of the municipality. And we did this in a number of cities, and the method has worked really, really well. It's very simple to implement. Now, if you're interested in one of the results here, we have the example of the city of Durban, where we went through all steps in the rapid climate risk assessment approach. And we summarized all results in a very nice looking story map. The URL is here in the left bottom of the screen. So we have all the news items, the projections for the different hazards. We also included available maps and visualized the different different hazards in appealing ways. Okay, so I showed two examples, first the comprehensive one and now the rapid climate risk assessments, two completely different approaches. The comprehensive climate risk assessment is very time and resource intensive. So that is really something to realize upfront. It requires a lot of data. And in data sparse regions, it will be very challenging to be able to complete a comprehensive risk assessment. From my experience, I think aggregating all the indicators to risk indices is in a way creating a black box. And that was the feedback that we got from many users, that they see the colors on the map, but they don't really understand why is my city orange and the neighboring city is maybe green. So what is driving this risk? And you cannot really get that from the aggregated indicator scores. So that is, I think, one of the downsides of this comprehensive risk assessment approach. Now, what we are trying to do through SAFE4ALL is to set up climate atlases for the 3 countries to better enable climate risk assessments, to have the basic data that you need to complete as a risk assessment, to have that ready on the climate atlas, because that will really make it a lot more easy to do tailored climate risk assessments for regions. Now, the rapid climate risk assessment is more engaging. It has lower data requirements, but of course it is less evidence-based. So it all relies on expert judgment. And it's also not spatially explicit. So you do the assessment for a city as a whole. I don't think it can be done for a country as a whole, because you will not be able to give the spatial or to generate spatially explicit results in this way. But it is easier to connect to an action perspective. And you don't have this risk of a black box. It is all co-created and transparent how we get to the end results. So whether to choose for a rapid approach or a comprehensive approach is really a matter of choosing the right tool for the job. And what is really important is to realize upfront what is the next step for the user. Are you at a very early stage of adaptation and resilience building? Are you working on awareness raising and getting primary support for action? Then maybe a rapid CRA approach works very well. It is cheap, it is fast, no data requirements, so that works for initial phases of adaptation, planning and resilience building. But are you designing climate-proof infrastructures? Are you further advanced in the adaptation planning process? Then maybe a comprehensive approach is better. And the 2 examples that I showed are the 2 extremes. And of course, there's a continuum and there are different approaches, intermediate approaches or hybrid approaches also available. And to wrap up, I think it is also important that we realize that for climate action, we don't need to know everything there is about future climate change. For many adaptation options, they are good ideas in any way, like urban greening, water retention, ecosystem rehabilitation. All these things are good ideas anyway, regardless of the speed and magnitude of climate change. So we don't have to know everything about future climate change to get to climate action. And also for doing the right things, you need to understand primarily how the local context works, so how the ecosystem functions, how the hydrology of an area functions. So maybe it is not always so important to know the exact climate projections for all the scenarios. You need to understand the system as a whole. And uncertainty in future climate risk data shouldn't become a reason for not acting.